The decision to let go is among the most misunderstood movements of the psyche. It is often mistaken for weakness, for avoidance, or for surrendering in the face of struggle. But in the inner world, to let go is to step toward the unknown with a sacred kind of courage. It is not passive, it is profoundly active. It is not escape, it is initiation. It begins not with the hands, but with the heart, and its effects ripple through every layer of consciousness. When one truly lets go, a psychic death occurs. Something within that was once bound, attached, defended, or claimed begins to dissolve. This death is not physical, but symbolic, a relinquishing of attachment to an identity, relationship, desire, outcome, or belief that has come to define one's sense of self. It is the death of the known, and with it, the security that familiarity provides. In this moment, the ego recoils, for it has built its fortress upon control and continuity. The ego thrives on story, on structure, on predictability. Letting go threatens all of that. It threatens the illusion of mastery. And yet, what the ego calls death, the soul often calls beginning. This inner death is not chaos, though it may feel like it. It is the dismantling of that which no longer carries life. It is the psyche's way of pruning the tree of the self, cutting away what no longer grows so that deeper roots can form. When one clings, one stagnates. When one releases, space is made for something older than thought, the self, to begin its quiet emergence. The unconscious, which has long waited behind the veil of repression and fear, takes this act of surrender as a signal. It recognizes the release as readiness. It senses that the conscious mind has finally loosened its grip, and now the deeper layers of being may rise. This process does not occur in silence. Often, the first response from within is grief. A deep sorrow not only for what has been lost, but for what was held onto for so long without nourishment. There is grief for the wasted energy, for the illusions protected, for the stories defended long after their truth had faded. But beneath that grief is something softer, quieter, more profound relief. A spaciousness begins to form in the psyche, a new interiority. One begins to feel the difference between carrying and being carried. And in this shift, something sacred unfolds. The mind begins to unhook from obsession, and the heart begins to beat with something closer to truth. The process is not linear. To let go is to enter into a cycle of loss and revelation, breakdown and expansion. The unconscious does not operate by clock or calendar, it operates by symbol and feeling. Dreams may intensify. Long-forgotten memories may surface. The body may even react, as if releasing the past from the very tissues. This is no mere mental event. It is somatic, emotional, spiritual. It is the entire being shedding skin. And what dies is not simply what was held, but also the self that held it. Every attachment carries a self-concept, a version of who we were when we clung to that which is now being released. To let go is to release not just the object, but also the identity wrapped around it. This is the deeper difficulty, for we are not just mourning what we lost. We are mourning who we were. We are laying to rest the character we played in a chapter that has ended. The loss becomes existential. But with that death, another kind of self begins to stir. A more authentic self, one unburdened by the compulsions of clinging or the defenses of fear. It is important to understand that this inner death is not a void. It is preparation. What feels like emptiness is sacred space being cleared. The unconscious does not destroy without intent. It removes what is false to make room for what is real. But the waiting is hard. The ego wants immediate reward, immediate proof that the letting go was worth it. But the soul does not operate by the ego's timeline. It waits until the ground is ready. It waits until the self is no longer striving, no longer forcing, no longer attempting to manipulate the outcome. In that stillness, the true change begins. Letting go is a threshold. One does not know what lies on the other side, and that is the point. If it were known, it would not be surrender, it would be strategy. The unknown is essential to transformation. It is the container within which the psyche can reshape. The conscious mind may resist, may demand clarity, closure, comfort, but those desires belong to the self that is fading. The new self does not yet speak in words. It speaks in sensation, in silence, in the subtle shift of how one relates to life. It is a birth, not with celebration but with stillness. The world may not immediately reflect the inner shift. There may be no visible change in circumstance, but internally something has turned. The grip is released. the knot is loosened. What was once a clenched fist is now an open hand. And in that openness, something long forgotten can finally return, not something external, but something internal. A feeling, a presence, a knowing that you were never meant to carry it all alone. That something greater, older, and infinitely wiser is always waiting for the moment when you decide not to win, but to release. And in that release, the architecture of the psyche rearranges. When the act of letting go becomes real, not simply a decision in thought but a full-bodied relinquishment. The universe does not remain still. It is not merely a poetic phrase to say that life responds. It is a metaphysical reality experienced throughout history in symbol, dream, and synchrony. To let go is to send a signal, not outward into the air, but inward toward the source of all meaning. The unconscious, which connects us to a deeper intelligence beyond the personal, receives this signal and begins to stir. Letting go creates a psychic vacuum. In the moment we release attachment to a person, a future, an identity, something essential happens. Space is made. And just as nature rushes to fill a vacuum in the physical world, so too does the psyche move to fill what has been emptied. But this is no random filling. It is not the mere substitution of one thing for another. It is an echo of what has been summoned by the soul's readiness. The universe, seen as an extension of our own psychic structure, responds with what matches the vibration of that newly available space. This is where synchronicity appears. These are not coincidences in the conventional sense, not merely chance alignments of events. These are meaningful connections, are causal but not meaningless. They are expressions of the psyche interacting with the world in symbolic form. When you let go of something that was keeping you bound, it is as if the universe can finally respond with a truth that had been waiting, perhaps for years, to be acknowledged. The delay was never on the side of the cosmos. It was always on the side of your resistance. Synchronicities are not always grand or dramatic. Sometimes they arrive in whispers. A conversation overheard, a book that appears in your path, a dream that confirms what you've long intuited. These small yet potent events are not random. They are the language of the unconscious, revealing that what you have surrendered is being answered. These signs do not control you, but they reflect the internal shift. You do not follow them blindly, but you begin to notice that the texture of reality itself has changed. Something is moving beneath the surface. The world feels responsive, alive, like it knows something you do not. The rational mind will doubt this. It will seek proof, linearity, logic. It wants a chain of causation, a trail that leads from letting go to manifestation in precise, controlled steps. But the psyche is not a machine. It is an organism. And organisms respond not to commands but to alignment. When your internal world begins to align with truth, when you stop clinging to what is dead, life begins to present you with new possibilities. These possibilities were not created by your action, they were revealed by your surrender. This is not the same as passivity. Letting go is not the absence of movement. It is the movement of being rather than doing. It is an act of alignment, of consenting to the deeper currents of your life. When you let go, you cease the frantic attempt to control outcomes, and in that space, something far more intelligent begins to emerge. What comes is not always what you expected, but it is always what you are now ready for. The soul is not interested in comfort. It is interested in expansion, and so what the universe brings you may not soothe you, but it will shape you. Often, after letting go, people report an increase in strange or liminal experiences, moments that feel oddly timed, encounters that feel predestined, symbols that repeat themselves in dreams and waking life. These are not hallucinations. They are the psyche's way of responding to the act of surrender. They remind you that you are now in a liminal space, between who you were and who you are becoming. And in this space, the rules of reality begin to bend, just enough to show you that you are no longer bound by the past. This sacred feedback loop is not about wish fulfillment. It is not a spiritual vending machine that delivers results when you insert your sacrifice. Instead, it is a mysterious dance between self and world, between what you let go of and what begins to arise in its place. And often, what arises is not a thing but a feeling, a clarity, a peace, a knowing that was once inaccessible. You may begin to feel, for the first time in a long time, that you are not alone. that your inner movement is mirrored by something much larger, and that this mirroring is not illusion but affirmation. To witness this unfolding is to understand that the boundary between inner and outer is far more porous than we are taught to believe. The psyche is not trapped within the skull. It extends, it relates, it communicates. And when you decide to release what is false, the larger field begins to adjust. People who no longer resonate may drift. New figures may arrive. Circumstances shift. Patterns break. You begin to walk in a reality that reflects not your fear, but your truth. Not your clinging, but your capacity for depth. Letting go then becomes an invocation. It calls forth the next stage of your becoming. It clears the psychic fog so the path can be revealed, not all at once, but in increments that match your readiness. The response may not be immediate or obvious. It may not come in the form you hoped, but it comes. Because the moment you let go, truly and wholly, you have already entered into a contract with what is beyond the personal, beyond the known. You have said yes to the mystery. And the mystery always answers those who are willing to stop demanding and start listening. The moment a person decides to let go, the internal conflict between the ego and the shadow intensifies. This is not merely an emotional experience, it is an archetypal event, a confrontation between the known self and the unknown parts buried beneath the surface of consciousness. The ego, which has spent years constructing a coherent narrative of control, success, desire, and personal identity, resists this shift with all its strength. Letting go threatens its illusion of dominance, and it recoils in fear. It interprets the act as defeat, as failure, as loss. But beneath the ego's lament, the shadow begins to stir, not with grief, but with anticipation. The shadow has long been the exile of the psyche. It contains all that we have denied, rejected, or deemed unacceptable. Not only our flaws and wounds, but also the gold of our unlived potential. It is everything that did not fit the image we tried to project into the world. And when we let go of that projection, when we drop the performance, the attachment, the need to be seen in a particular way, the shadow sees an opening. It senses the fall of a wall. What was repressed now seeks entrance. What was silenced now wants a voice. This process can be deeply unsettling. The ego does not give up easily, and the re-emergence of the shadow is rarely gentle. Old fears resurface, doubts multiply, behaviors you thought you had grown out of may reappear. You may find yourself confused, uncertain, more vulnerable than ever before. But this is not regression, it is resurrection. The unconscious is not punishing you, it is reorganizing. It is reclaiming energy that was locked in repression, bound in defense mechanisms, trapped in personas that no longer reflect your truth. To let go is to disarm the inner censor. It is to create a psychic condition where the shadow no longer needs to hide. And what emerges is often startling. You may meet aspects of yourself that seem foreign, intense, even threatening. You may feel emotions long buried, rage, jealousy, grief, longing, that do not match your previous self-image. This is the cost of wholeness. For as long as we cling to one version of self, we deny the rest. When that version is released, the full spectrum of the psyche begins to rise, demanding recognition and reintegration. This is not pathology, it is individuation, the gradual becoming of a whole person. It requires that you face what you have feared within yourself and make room for it. Not to indulge it, not to be ruled by it, but to understand it. Every element in the shadow has a story. Every rejected trait was once a survival strategy, a defense, a response to a world that told you what to be. Now, in letting go, you are finally strong enough to face those stories and allow the energy within them to be reabsorbed consciously. Paradoxically, this is also where great creativity emerges. The shadow does not only hold the dark, it holds the repressed gold, the dreams you dismissed, the talents you neglected, the instincts you ignored. Letting go clears the stage, and the shadow steps forward not only with wounds but with wisdom. It carries the forgotten language of your soul. The stories it tells are raw but real. They point toward what is most essential, most alive. They challenge your persona, but they also offer the key to your authenticity. Many people fear the shadow because they believe it is purely negative. But this is a distortion. What is dangerous is not the shadow itself, but the refusal to engage with it. When denied, the shadow controls from below. It sabotages, manipulates, erupts in moments of crisis. When welcomed however it transforms, it becomes an ally. Its darkness turns into depth, its chaos into insight. To let go, then, is to begin this sacred dialogue. It is to create the conditions under which the unconscious can speak, and the conscious mind can listen without judgment. This is not an overnight process. The ego will attempt to reassert itself. It will look for new things to cling to, new roles to play, new identities to assume. But something fundamental has shifted. Once the dialogue with the shadow begins, it cannot be undone. You start to see the false self for what it is, a mask, a construction, and you begin to feel, often in moments of silence or solitude, the presence of something deeper watching, waiting, emerging. This deeper presence is not interested in how others see you. It is not concerned with approval or achievement. It wants only your truth. That truth may not be easy. It may require further letting go of relationships, ambitions, beliefs, and ways of being that no longer serve. But each release brings you closer to center. Each surrender removes a layer of illusion. The shadow, once integrated, no longer pulls you down. Instead, it grounds you. It connects you to the totality of who you are. Not a perfect self, but a whole one. And from this wholeness, a new kind of power emerges. Not control, but presence. Not dominance, but depth. The shadow does not ask for obedience. It asks for acknowledgement. It asks to be seen, to be held in the light of awareness. And when it is, the struggle between parts of the self begins to dissolve. Inner conflict gives way to inner coherence. The psyche starts to align, not around the ego's agenda, but around the truth of the self, the deeper intelligence that always knew what had to be released, and what would arise in its place. The act of letting go thus becomes not just a moment of freedom, but the beginning of a lifelong descent into the richness of your own being, where nothing is wasted and nothing is lost, only reclaimed. When the decision to let go is made, one often expects the aftermath to be a clean slate, calm, clarity, peace. But the reality is frequently more paradoxical. After the release, a void opens, and with it comes a profound sense of disorientation. This disorientation is not a mistake, nor is it a regression. It is the liminal phase, the in-between space where the old has been relinquished, but the new has not yet formed. It is a sacred threshold, where the psyche is no longer bound by past narratives, but not yet anchored in the future's unfolding. In this space, time stretches, certainties vanish, familiar routines dissolve, and what is left is the unknown. This unknown is not empty in the way we think of emptiness, sterile, blank, without meaning. It is, in fact, full of possibility, full of unconscious material, full of potential directions. But because it is unfamiliar, the ego experiences it as threat. The ego craves predictability, and in this threshold, predictability dies. This is when the deeper layers of the psyche begin to emerge. Dreams may become more vivid, symbolic content rises to the surface, and one's inner world begins to reflect the intensity of transformation taking place beneath ordinary awareness. It is in this stage that we are most likely to feel lost. But we are not lost, we are between versions of ourselves. The threshold is where the alchemical process intensifies. Having separated from the old self, the psyche now enters the nigredo, the dark phase of dissolution. This is the time when the elements of the self break down. Identity is questioned. Motivations become unclear. One may feel lethargic, unmoored, unsure of anything once deemed meaningful. And yet this is precisely the precondition for renewal. The soul cannot receive the new while still clinging to the old form. The universe cannot send the next iteration of your life if you are not empty enough to receive it. This emptiness is not void of value. It is sacred gestation. During this period, many feel the urge to run backward, to reattach, to reclaim what was just released. This is natural, but it is also the great test. The pull of the familiar is strongest when the new has not yet arrived, but those who can sit with the discomfort of this psychic wilderness begin to notice subtle signs. The unconscious begins to reorganize. Symbols appear, intuitions surface, synchronicities increase. The deeper self, no longer drowned out by noise and false attachments, begins to speak in the quiet. This voice is not loud, but it is unmistakable. It does not provide answers in the conventional sense, but it offers orientation, a direction, a feeling, a resonance that gently leads the way. This is where the psyche begins to form a new center. The old personality structure, built to accommodate survival, approval, and egoic desires, dissolves to make space for something more authentic. This process is not always glamorous. In fact, it often looks like regression from the outside. The individual may withdraw from relationships, lose interest in former goals, question spiritual frameworks, or feel alienated from previous communities. But this alienation is not pathology, it is individuation. It is the withdrawal of energy from the external persona so that it can be redirected toward the inner world, where the new self is being forged. The threshold phase also reveals what was previously unconscious. Letting go does not just remove people or circumstances from our lives. It removes the illusions we projected onto them. It confronts us with our own needs, wounds, and shadow material. It shows us the part of ourselves that clung because it was afraid, the part that feared emptiness, the part that confused possession with love, ambition with purpose, success with worth. In the absence of what we released, we are finally forced to face ourselves as we are, not as we were trained to be, but as we are when no longer pretending. Here, the role of suffering changes. It is no longer seen as punishment or misfortune, but as purification, not in the moral sense, but in the psychological one. Suffering strips away illusion. It breaks the hard casing of the ego and exposes the soul. It is through this exposure that deeper truths are revealed, not by choice but by necessity. You begin to see what truly matters, what is truly yours, what you must now become in order to move forward. The unnecessary falls away, the inessential dies, and from this reduction, something essential begins to pulse, quietly, at first, like a heartbeat you forgot was there. This is also when one learns the difference between solitude and loneliness. The former becomes a sanctuary. In solitude, the self becomes visible. The inner architecture of your psyche, previously hidden by distraction and noise, begins to take form. The dreams you buried rise. The voice you ignored speaks. You begin to notice that you are not empty at all. You are full of a self that was waiting to be remembered. The threshold does not show you who you are becoming. It shows you who you have always been, beneath the layers of defense and desire. Patience is the key to this transformation. The ego wants results, timelines, clarity, but the soul works in seasons, not seconds. You cannot rush the new into being. You can only create the conditions in which it might arise, and the condition is surrender. When you do not demand certainty, you begin to notice grace. When you stop grasping, life begins to offer. What you receive is not always what you imagined, but it is always what aligns with the deeper truth you are now willing to live. The threshold then becomes not a place of waiting, but a place of initiation. The disorientation becomes sacred, the emptiness becomes a vessel, and what fills it is not just a new life, but a new consciousness. When one fully releases attachment, not just in thought but in the deepest folds of the psyche, a mysterious principle begins to unfold. It appears subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the soft shifting of internal tides. But over time, it reveals itself as a fundamental law of psychological and spiritual reality. The universe responds not to your words or intentions alone, but to your inner orientation. When you let go, truly let go, the energy within you changes frequency. It moves from contraction to expansion, from fear to trust, from clinging to flow. And this shift is not merely internal. It ripples out. The world responds because your vibration no longer demands the same reflection it once did. Letting go is not abandonment. It is not passivity or resignation. It is the quiet but courageous refusal to resist what is. It is the choice to step out of the illusion of control and into the truth of participation. Participation in a mystery that is larger than the personal will. The psyche, once bound by defense mechanisms and compulsive desires, now opens to the unknown. This opening is an invitation, and the universe, or more precisely, the field of life in which all things participate, begins to reorganize around your surrender. What once seemed stuck begins to move, what once was blocked begins to shift, but not always in the ways the ego had planned. This is the paradox that baffles many. They expect that letting go will bring immediate reward, a sign, a blessing, a solution. But this is the ego's bargain, not the soul's way. The true response of the universe is often silence, stillness, space, not because it is empty, but because it is sacred. It is in this silence that the unconscious begins to guide, not through logic but through alignment. People begin to exit your life, not as punishment, but as release. Old goals lose their taste. New insights come, not from striving, but from simply being present enough to receive them. Life stops being a negotiation and becomes an unfolding. This unfolding reveals what is essential. Letting go removes the distortions caused by projection. When you no longer impose your will on life, you begin to see what is actually true. Relationships you once fought to maintain fall away, and you no longer feel the same grief, because you see now they were built on illusion. Jobs or paths that once seemed crucial fade into the background, and something deeper begins to call. This is not the voice of ambition, it is the whisper of destiny. It says, now that you are no longer grasping, you are ready to receive. Now that you have emptied your hands, they can hold something real. This is how the response comes, not in the form of dramatic interventions, but in the quiet, almost invisible alignments. The right person appears just when you have stopped searching. The opportunity you had once chased begins to find its way to you, though you no longer need it. The creative insight flows when you have finally stopped forcing the process. The universe does not reward control, it responds to coherence. When your inner world becomes coherent, when your thoughts, emotions, and body are no longer in conflict, then the external world begins to echo that harmony. The world you experience is always a mirror of your inner state. Letting go changes the reflection. This is not magic. It is not manipulation. It is participation in a deeper order, an archetypal rhythm that underlies all transformation. When you stop clinging, you re-enter the flow of life itself. And in that flow, things move not because you pushed them, but because you stopped resisting their movement. This is the principle of synchronicity, meaningful coincidence that arises when the inner world and the outer world mirror one another. These events are not planned by the ego, they are orchestrated by a greater intelligence that responds only when the ego steps aside. Letting go, then, is a portal. It is the gesture that tells the unconscious, I am ready. Not ready to receive what I want, but ready to become what I am. And this readiness cannot be faked. The universe knows the difference between pretending and presence. It responds only when your surrender is real. Not theatrical, not performative, but rooted in genuine inner release. This is why many people do not experience the full response. They let go on the surface, but inwardly continue to grasp. They release with one hand but hold tightly with the other. The transformation comes only when both hands are open. In this openness, a new form of guidance emerges. It does not speak in commands or plans, but in intuition, resonance, and subtle nudges. The mind may not understand it, but the body knows. You feel a shift in energy. You are drawn, not driven. You are moved, not coerced. This is the intelligence of the self, the deeper center of being that lives beneath the noise of the ego. When you align with it, you no longer need to control everything. You simply follow the inner thread, and life begins to unfold in response. This does not mean the path is easy. Letting go is often followed by tests, not from the universe, but from your own unconscious. You will be tempted to go back, to reattach, to reassert control. But if you remain in surrender, the field continues to adjust. Life begins to reflect your internal freedom. Relationships become more authentic. Work becomes more meaningful. You begin to attract what is aligned, not because you chased it, but because you made space for it. The void you feared becomes the womb of creation. The silence you avoided becomes the voice of truth. The absence of control becomes the presence of grace. This is the response of the universe, not a prize, not a reward, but a reorientation. Letting go turns your life from a battle into a dance. It brings you into contact with the deep order behind apparent chaos. It reveals that nothing real is ever lost, only transformed. And that transformation does not require force, only willingness, only trust, only the courage to release what you never truly needed in the first place. When one reaches the end of this inner transformation, the shedding of illusions, the surrender of ego, the quiet unraveling of what was never truly ours, what emerges is not merely a new circumstance, but a new way of being. The psyche, once fragmented by fear, begins to unify around a center that was always present, waiting beneath the noise. Life no longer appears as something to control or conquer, but something to participate in with reverence and awareness. The journey through letting go, through disintegration and reorganization, through darkness and emergence, reveals that the true shift was never in the world outside, but in the consciousness perceiving it. It is only when we release the grasp of what we thought we needed that we become available to what is truly meant for us. And in this state, open, surrendered, whole, the universe, as if recognizing the return of something ancient and true, responds not with noise, but with quiet alignment, as if it had been waiting all along.